The lights of the studio glared off polished glass as the audience leaned in, sensing something brewing beneath the surface. Robert De Niro leaned back in his chair, barely hiding the smirk stretching across his face. His voice cut through the air, low and laced with condescension. Maybe stick to Congress and leave real talk to the professionals. A ripple moved across the room. Half laughter, half disbelief. Cameras caught it instantly. His raised brow, the tilt of his chin, the smug certainty of a man who believed the crowd was on his side. But across the table, Jasmine Crockett didn't move. No blink, no scoff, no rush to defend herself. Her hands were steady, folded gracefully in her lap. Her eyes held his, still and unshaken, as if she had been expecting this moment all along. The audience's laughter faltered. Something in her silence felt louder than his insult. Phones were already out. Red recording lights blinked like warning signs. Clips were being sliced in real time. De Niro mocks Congresswoman on live TV. The host tried to ease the tension with a chuckle, but the air had already shifted. Crockett finally drew a breath, slow and deliberate. The crowd leaned forward, waiting for anger, defense, something. Instead, calm. "Are you done?" she asked softly, her tone controlled, almost gentle. The words weren't loud, but they landed like a gavel. De Niro's smirk wavered for the briefest second. The silence stretched. She continued, her voice steady. "Because where I come from, real talk isn't measured by fame or applause. It's measured by whether it serves the people who can't sit in rooms like this." The audience went still. Even the cameras seemed to hesitate, focusing more tightly on her face. No raised voice, no theatrics, just quiet power. De Niro opened his mouth to reply, but the shift was already felt. The atmosphere unsettled, pride confronting purpose. And in that moment, something changed. People watching from home leaned closer to their screens. Comment sections exploded in real time. Hashtags began to take shape in the digital ether. Crowd reactions, gasps, whispered disbelief. But no one expected how Jasmine would respond, and what she said next made even De Niro go silent. Before the moment spiraled into headlines and hashtags, it was already bigger than a Hollywood star mocking a congresswoman. Robert De Niro wasn't just an actor. He was a cultural titan, a voice woven into decades of American cinema, someone whose political opinions often echoed across late-night stages and high-profile interviews. His words carried weight, not because of policy, but because of influence. And across from him sat Jasmine Crockett. Not a celebrity, but a public servant, forged in town halls and committee hearings, not movie studios. She didn't come from the world of applause. She came from the world of accountability. Rising, fast in Congress for her sharp logic, her precision under pressure, and her relentless defense of everyday people, she had become a symbol of a new kind of leadership. Calm, unbought, unapologetic. That's why this moment mattered. To the studio audience, it was entertainment. To millions watching at home, it was a clash of celebrity confidence against political conviction. But to Crockett, it was about something far deeper: respect, truth, representation. The unspoken rule that some voices are allowed to speak without consequence, while others must constantly prove they deserve to be heard. In the control room, producers whispered into headsets, "Clip that. Replay his line. Zoom in on her face." Newsroom alerts flashed. De Niro versus Crockett, tension live. On Twitter, the first ripples began to form. Did he really just say that to her? Crockett better clap back. Hollywood arrogance versus actual public service. The stakes weren't just personal. They were generational. The conversation had started civilly enough. A panel on truth in politics and the role of public figures in shaping national discourse. De Niro spoke freely, criticizing politicians with unfiltered passion. His frustration was familiar, his tone sharp, his delivery theatrical. Then he turned to Crockett, dismissing her measured response with a shrug and a smirk. Maybe stick to Congress and leave real talk to the professionals. It was more than a jab. It was a reminder of a hierarchy. where fame outranked service, where celebrity opinion overshadowed lived experience. The laughter that followed wasn't loud, but it was sharp. It pulled the oxygen from the room. Crockett's silence wasn't hesitation. It was a decision. To fight, not with volume, but with truth. Reporters outside the studio were already getting messages. Producers started teasing segments for the nightly shows. You won't believe what happened when De Niro challenged a congresswoman on live television. TikTok clips showed De Niro's smirk over dramatic music. Instagram stories captured Crockett's expression. Calm, unreadable, unbothered. People weren't just watching a disagreement. They were witnessing a power balance being tested. Cable news hosts prepped monologues. Political podcasts lined up emergency recordings. Some called it disrespect. Others called it courage. But everyone agreed, this wasn't just another viral moment. This was a collision of two very different Americas. Because the words that started this clash weren't random. They came from a much deeper divide. Long before the cameras caught his smirk that night, Robert De Niro had already carved his name into the bedrock of American culture. From Taxi Driver to Raging Bull, from The Godfather Part 2 to Goodfellas, he wasn't just an actor. He was an institution, a face that defined intensity, a voice that carried the grit of New York, a persona built on authenticity and unapologetic truth-telling. People listened when he spoke, not because he held office, but because he held history. But over the years, that voice shifted from scripts to speeches, from movie sets to political rallies. De Niro became more than a Hollywood legend. He became a political firebrand. He didn't whisper about his beliefs. He shouted them at award shows, gala stages, live television appearances. He criticized presidents, denounced corruption, and demanded accountability. The media called him brave. The public called him raw, but some called him reckless. Clips began to surface, De Niro on stage, fists clenched, voice trembling with anger. "I'm tired of the lies," he'd say. "Enough is enough." His passion was undeniable. But sometimes passion came with casualties. His words didn't just challenge power, they scorched it. And in that fire, some heard courage. Others heard contempt. That was the paradox of De Niro. He despised arrogance in government, yet at times he wielded his own version of it. When he spoke, it wasn't a conversation. It was a declaration. When he criticized, he didn't ask questions. He threw verdicts. Journalists replayed his speeches with dramatic music, calling him the voice of the people. But slowly, a quieter conversation emerged. Was his outrage still about justice, or had it become about the performance of it? There were moments that blurred the line. At a charity event, he called out public officials with language so fierce the audience gasped. The message was righteous. The delivery was ruthless. On live television, he once dismissed a younger activist's perspective with a casual wave of his hand, muttering, "Come back when you've seen the world." It wasn't malice. It was dismissal. The kind that comes from someone too used to being listened to, too unaccustomed to being questioned. His legacy was heavy with respect, but also with immunity. Public figures feared debating him, because who wants to argue with a legend? Interviewers leaned back when he got angry. Panels fell silent when he raised his voice. It wasn't fear of violence. It was fear of disrespecting a man the public adored, and yet the contradictions lingered. He spoke for the working class, but lived in penthouses. He demanded truth from politicians, but rarely allowed questions about his own statements. He stood against elitism, but his voice often carried the tone of it. Still, no one doubted his heart. He hated lies. He hated cruelty. He hated cowardice. But sometimes the way he fought them became its own kind of spectacle, an explosion of anger that left no room for conversation, only applause or backlash. So when he sat across from Jasmine Crockett on that stage, he carried all of this with him, his decades of acclaim, his righteous fury, his habit of speaking like the final authority in any room. The audience didn't just see De Niro, the actor. They saw De Niro, the symbol, the man unafraid to say what everyone else is thinking, the man who keeps it real. But there was something different this time. This wasn't a late-night talk show. This wasn't an award speech with a standing ovation waiting. This was a conversation with someone who didn't care about his Oscars or his legacy. Someone who cared about truth, measured words, and the people she represented. And when he smirked and said, "Maybe stick to Congress and leave real talk to the professionals," it wasn't just a joke. It was a reminder of the power he had grown used to, the power to mock, to dominate, to define the conversation. To many viewers, it was classic De Niro, sharp, fearless, unfiltered. But to others, it was something else. A man so used to being the voice of defiance that he didn't recognize when his defiance turned into dismissal. When his passion blurred into condescension, clips from his past resurfaced instantly. Him shouting across stages, him mocking officials, him applauded for being raw, real, and relentless. But now the question shifted. Was this still bravery, or was it habit? He had spent his life mastering characters built on grit and truth. But in that moment, facing someone who built her career on the same values, his armor of arrogance cracked, not because he was wrong, but because he forgot that power doesn't only live in fame, it also lives in purpose. He wasn't the villain of this story. He was a powerful voice, one that sometimes burned so intensely it forgot who it burned through. But if De Niro's legacy was built on boldness, Crockett's was built on something far stronger. Jasmine Crockett didn't grow up with silver screens or studio lights. She grew up with the echo of struggle, the rhythm of working-class America, where every choice mattered and every voice counted. In a modest Texas neighborhood, she watched her parents split shifts to keep food on the table. Her mother taught her that dignity was not something you were given. It was something you fought to keep. Her father reminded her that silence in the face of injustice was just another kind of betrayal. These weren't lessons from textbooks. They were lessons from life, branded into her early understanding of the world. As a teenager, Jasmine wasn't the loudest in class, but she was the one teachers remembered. Sharp, unflinching, and unable to look away when others suffered. She volunteered at community centers, not because it looked good on applications, but because she saw pieces of her own story in every tired face waiting for help. When friends dreamed of Hollywood glamour or Wall Street success, Jasmine dreamed of fairness, a word she didn't just say, but lived. She earned her law degree not to join high-powered firms, but to defend those no one else would. Courtrooms became battlegrounds, and she walked in like a soldier armed with case files and conviction. Public defenders don't get applause, but they see the raw truth of the system, and Jasmine saw it all. Mothers crying in hallways, young men whose futures rested on a judge's sigh, families broken by fines they couldn't pay. In those rooms, she learned how to stay calm while the world fractured around her. She learned how to speak truth in spaces designed to silence it. Her reputation grew, not in headlines but in whispers. If Jasmine takes your case, she fights like it's her own. And she did. Every victory was borrowed time, every loss a scar. But it wasn't enough. Winning one case at a time felt like trying to stop a flood with bare hands. She wanted to change the system itself, not just survive it. So she ran for office. They said she was too young, too fierce, too unwilling to play nice with power. But that was exactly why people elected her. In Congress, marble floors couldn't slow her stride. She questioned officials the same way she questioned witnesses, directly, without theatrics, but with a force that made even seasoned politicians shift in their seats. There's a moment her supporters always talk about, a hearing where a high-ranking official tried to dodge responsibility. Jasmine leaned forward, voice steady, eyes unblinking, and asked, "Are you telling the American people that accountability is optional for you?" The room fell silent. Cameras captured not just her words, but her refusal to let power gaslight the public. Supporters call her a shield for the unheard. Critics say she's too aggressive, but aggression isn't what defines her. Purpose does. Every time she speaks, it isn't for applause or trending clips. It's for the single mother sitting at home hoping someone, anyone, will tell the truth in that room. It's for the immigrant child being told to wait quietly while their future is debated like a budget line. It's for the seniors who worked their whole lives only to be forgotten in policy drafts. Jasmine carries those voices like armor. Her colleagues noticed something else. She doesn't chase cameras. In a world where fleeting fame is currency, Jasmine walks away from spotlight unless it's needed to illuminate injustice. She understands the difference between attention and impact. When journalists ask why she didn't smile more in interviews or soften her tone to appear more relatable, she answers simply, "I'm not here to make people comfortable. I'm here to make things right." Behind the intensity, though, there is empathy, a quiet, powerful kind. Late at night, in her office lit only by desk lamp and tired determination, she writes letters to families affected by legislation. She calls mothers after hearings just to ask if they're holding up. She reads every letter sent to her by constituents, even the ones that accuse her of being too bold, too loud, too unwilling to bend. She doesn't resent them. She understands them. People aren't afraid of her voice. They're afraid of what it reveals, that truth has been ignored for too long. And yet Jasmine knows the cost of her path. She knows every time she confronts hypocrisy, there are whispers that she's too much, too emotional, too direct, too unwilling to play the game. But she never asked to play. She asked to lead. So when Robert De Niro, with all his Hollywood prestige and decades of applause, mocked her place in the conversation, it wasn't just another insult. It was the echo of every time public service had been dismissed as less glamorous, less meaningful, less important than celebrity opinion. It was every young girl from a forgotten neighborhood being told her voice mattered less than a famous man's microphone. It was every courtroom, every hearing, every late-night call condensed into a single moment, a moment where silence would have been easier. But Jasmine Crockett didn't build her legacy on easy. She took a breath. Not to collect words, but to remember who she was speaking for. The ones who never get invited to televised panels. The ones whose lives don't trend on social media. The ones who believed, just for a second, that maybe this time someone like them would speak, and not back down. So when Hollywood glamour tried to belittle public service, she didn't respond for applause. She responded for principle. The lights are unforgiving, bright enough to catch every twitch, every smirk. Robert De Niro leans back in his chair, microphone in hand, voice dripping with that familiar sarcasm. "Look, I'm all for passionate speeches," he says, forcing a theatrical sigh. "But some things are better left to people who understand the real world. Not just committee rooms and talking points." A ripple of laughter comes from one corner of the audience. Polite, uncertain, but loud enough to sting. He sees the reaction and presses forward, as though applause is fuel. "Congress has enough drama," he adds, mockingly raising his eyebrows. "We don't need amateurs trying to play experts on national issues." The words float in the air like smoke, heavy, suffocating. A few heads nod, others stare in disbelief. Phones lift again, capturing every second. Comment sections are already being born. And Jasmine Crockett, she doesn't move, not a blink, not a flinch. Her hands rest gently on the table, fingers intertwined. Her posture as straight as a drawn line. Cameras zoom in, searching for a reaction. Anger, embarrassment, anything. But her face is unreadable. Calm, controlled, like a storm gathering behind glass. De Niro notices her silence and mistakes it for surrender. He shifts forward, voice louder now. "You know, Jasmine, it's cute when politicians try to sound tough. But maybe stick to voting and let real conversations be handled by people who don't need permission to speak truth." He smiles, satisfied. More laughter, this time sharper, more confident. Someone in the audience whispers, "Is she going to say anything?" But the silence doesn't break. It deepens. It starts to feel less like defeat and more like judgment. De Niro's grin fades just slightly, as if he suddenly wonders who exactly is being mocked. The crowd feels the change too. The kind of shift you don't see, only feel. Like the air before lightning strikes. Producers in the back exchange glances. One taps a headset. "Stay on her," they whisper to the camera operator. "She's about to crack and/or kill the moment." But Jasmine isn't cracking. She's waiting. The moderator clears his throat, sensing the tension. "Congresswoman Crockett, would you like to respond?" The room quiets instantly. Even De Niro's smirk pauses, suspended between confidence and caution. Jasmine looks up, slowly, deliberately. Her eyes meet his, not with fire, but with something far more unsettling. Certainty. She leans in just slightly, but her voice doesn't come. Not yet. De Niro tries to reassert control. "If you don't have anything, that's fine," he says, chuckling. Silence says enough. He expects agreement. Instead, the room stays still. A different kind of silence now, heavier, charged. Not hers. Theirs. A journalist near the front whispers to her colleague, "Why does it feel like she's winning without speaking?" The colleague shrugs, eyes still locked on her. Phones keep recording. Comments keep flying. De Niro vs. Crockett starts climbing trends. Jasmine finally moves. Just her hand, a small adjustment of her microphone. The sound is gentle, barely audible, but in this quiet it echoes like thunder. She doesn't look angry. She looks ready, and that's when the laughter stops. De Niro straightens unconsciously, as if bracing for something he can't quite name. His voice lowers. "Go ahead," he mutters, almost defensive. "Say what you have to say." It's no longer mockery. It's anticipation, maybe even fear. The moderator leans forward, sensing history. The audience holds its breath. Somewhere, a producer whispers, "We're live in 30 countries. Don't cut away." Jasmine's silence, once mocked, now owns the room. Her calm is louder than his insults. Her stillness is sharper than his words. And yet, she still hasn't spoken. Not one word. Not yet. Across social media, screens freeze on her face. The clip is shared, reposted, dissected. Commenters write, "Why isn't she saying anything?" Others reply, "Because she doesn't have to. Not yet. The world waits." And then, with the world watching, she finally spoke. For a moment, it felt like the air itself refused to move. Robert De Niro leaned back in his chair, arms folded. That familiar grin lingering like he'd already won the room. The cameras stayed tight on him, waiting for the next punchline. But Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch. She didn't blink. She simply breathed in, steady, deliberate. The kind of breath taken not before a fight, but before a truth. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft enough to make the silence louder. "Mr. De Niro," she began, "you once said," and I quote, "I love this country enough to call it out when it's wrong." The grin on his face paused, just slightly. Enough for the room to feel it, she continued, her tone calm, unwavering. "You said that on national television. People applauded you for it. They called it brave. They called it necessary." Now eyes were shifting, from De Niro to Crockett, from entertainer to elected official. "So help me understand," she said, leaning forward just an inch. "Why is it courageous when you challenge power, but inconvenient when someone like me does?" No laughter now, no smirks. Just stillness. Crockett didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "You said silence in the face of injustice is complicity. Remember that? Because I do. I live by it. I don't have a script. I don't have rehearsed applause. I have a seat in Congress, and I take it seriously." De Niro's smile flickered again. This time, not in amusement, but discomfort. She let his own words linger in the air, like a mirror he didn't want to look at. And then, she delivered the line that would be replayed across every screen in the country. "Respect isn't earned by fame," she said. "It's earned by truth." A muffled gasp swept across the studio. Not dramatic, but real. Like the sound of people realizing they had just witnessed a shift. She didn't stop. "I grew up in places where people don't get heard, where their names never make headlines. But they still fight. They still show up. So yes, I sit in Congress. And no, I don't act for cameras. Because real talk isn't found in a movie script. It's found in the lives of the people we're supposed to serve." De Niro watched her now. Really watched her. The grin was gone. His hands, once relaxed, now folded tighter. Crockett continued, each sentence like a scalpel. "You've spoken about corruption, greed, and cowardice in politics, and you were right. But don't you dare tell me that speaking truth from inside the system is any less real than shouting from outside it." A quiet nod in the crowd. Someone lowered their phone, no longer recording, just absorbing. "You fought your battles with cameras and scripts," she said. "I fight mine with laws, votes, and the lives of people who can't afford for me to be wrong." She paused, not to think, but to let everyone else catch up. "And if you think my voice doesn't matter because I don't come with Hollywood lighting, then maybe the problem isn't me. Maybe the problem is who this country has decided is allowed to speak." That line hit like thunder. No one spoke. Not the moderator. Not the panelists. Even the producers behind the glass paused their frantic movements. She didn't gloat. She didn't smirk. She simply finished with grace. You once said, I'd rather fight for something real than stay quiet for applause. So here I am, fighting, not for applause, for accountability. Silence, the kind of silence that feels like a verdict. De Niro swallowed. His posture straightened slightly, as if his body knew something his pride wasn't ready to accept. That he'd been answered, not attacked. That he'd been challenged, not disrespected. Crockett leaned back in her chair, her expression unchanged, calm, composed, unbothered. Someone in the audience started clapping, quietly, almost unsure if they were allowed to. Then another joined, then another. It wasn't a roaring ovation. It was something more powerful, a slow, steady acknowledgement. De Niro didn't speak. His lips parted like he might, but no words came. Across the studio, phones were already capturing the moment. Clips were being uploaded before the sound even fully faded. One headline drafted itself in real time. Crockett just quoted De Niro and silenced him with his own words. She didn't look at the cameras. She didn't turn to the audience. She simply folded her hands and looked forward, like someone who didn't come to win a moment, but to remind people of a truth. Producers exchanged looks behind the glass. Someone whispered, "We need to cut to break." Someone else said, "No, keep it rolling." De Niro finally exhaled, the bravado gone. He nodded once, a gesture so small it would have gone unnoticed if not for the fact that everyone was watching. And in that nod, something shifted. Not in politics or Hollywood, but in perception. A silent acknowledgement that power doesn't always come with a spotlight. Sometimes it comes with restraint. Crockett didn't say another word. She didn't have to. Her silence now carried more weight than any monologue. The host, unsure how to recover, cleared his throat. "Well, Congresswoman, that's quite a perspective." But no one was listening to him. They were still hearing her, still seeing him, quiet, reflective, unsure. And they were thinking, what happens when truth doesn't shout, but whispers? What happens when the person expected to be humiliated becomes the one who restores humility? The cameras kept rolling. The clip was already destined to go viral, but the shockwaves of her words didn't end in that studio. It didn't take hours. It didn't even take minutes. Within seconds of the broadcast clip hitting the internet, it detonated across every platform. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. Each turned into a battleground of disbelief, admiration, and raw reaction. The hashtags rose like a digital tide. Robert Crockett vs. De Niro. Truth over fame. Respect the seat, 'cause she ate. Wrong one tweet read. Robert De Niro has faced mob bosses and dictators on screen, but he just got taken down by calm facts and his own words. Another said, "This isn't disrespect. This is what happens when fame collides with integrity." Clips of the exchange flooded timelines. Some slowed down for dramatic effect. Some auto-captioned with bold red letters, "Respect isn't earned by fame, it's earned by truth." TikTok creators remixed her line with cinematic music. Teenagers lip-synced it. Activists stitched it with footage of historic protests, calling it the modern microphone drop of politics. Cable news wasn't far behind. That evening, panel after panel replayed the footage. Pundits leaned forward in their chairs like they were watching a courtroom finale. One anchor said, "You could see his expression change when that wasn't performance. That was impact." Another responded, "This wasn't Hollywood versus Congress, this was ego versus principle." Some celebrities jumped in with fire emojis and quotes from Crockett's speech. The list actors posted, "You don't need Oscars to speak truth, you just need courage." Others defended De Niro, calling it a misinterpretation of passion. But even they couldn't ignore the shift in tone. It wasn't mockery anymore. It was reckoning. Late-night hosts added humor, but the audience laughter wasn't as loud as usual, because under the jokes, everyone knew something significant had happened. One host said, "De Niro's played every tough guy there is, but tonight he met someone tougher. A woman with a memory, a microphone, and a spine." Memes exploded. Split-screen images of De Niro from Goodfellas beside his silent reaction went viral with captions like, "When the script flips and you're not the director anymore." Another showed Jasmine Crockett with the words, "Calm, sharp, unbothered." Even the political world reacted. Members of Congress tweeted quietly supportive quotes without naming names, but everyone knew. One senator wrote, "Public service deserves respect regardless of who's holding the camera." A governor posted, "Reminded today that truth delivered calmly can echo louder than 1,000 insults." But backlash came too. Editorials surfaced claiming Crockett was too harsh. Others defended De Niro's right to speak freely. Opinion columns debated whether Hollywood should intervene in political conversations, or whether politicians had finally learned how to answer back. Still, the numbers didn't lie. Millions of views within hours. Subtitles in multiple languages. International headlines. American Congresswoman silences Hollywood legend using his own words. European newspapers called it the moment dignity outperformed celebrity. In South America, a journalist tweeted, "This wasn't about winning. It was about reminding the world that truth can speak softly and still thunder." A podcast host summarized it best. That wasn't a clapback. That was a masterclass in discipline and memory. She didn't embarrass him. She reminded him. On Reddit, threads dissected every word, every breath. People debated whether De Niro looked angry or humbled. Frame-by-frame analyses appeared. Zoomed-in images of his expression changing, her posture remaining steady. It wasn't mockery. It was respect for precision. And then came the interviews. Reporters chased people who had been in the studio. One crew member said, "The room felt like a balloon popped in slow motion." Nobody expected her to hit back like that, and definitely not like that. Another witness described the silence after her line. It wasn't awkward. It was powerful, like everyone was afraid to break it. Even actors who usually stayed silent about politics commented quietly. One wrote, "I've worked with De Niro. I admire him. But tonight, Crockett reminded us that truth doesn't need a camera angle to land." But through all of it, the praise, the applause, the firestorms of opinion, Jasmine Crockett didn't tweet a victory lap. She didn't post a clip. She didn't appear in celebratory interviews. Reporters waited outside her office. Publicists emailed her staff asking for statements. Producers begged for exclusive rights to her response. She said nothing. While millions replayed her words, she stayed silent, not out of pride, but purpose. To her, it wasn't a performance. It wasn't a win, it was a responsibility. And that silence was louder than any cheer, any meme, any headline. It was the silence of someone who knew the power of restraint, the silence of someone who didn't speak to go viral. She spoke to be honest, but Crockett didn't. "Celebrate," she reflected. Days passed before Jasmine Crockett said a single word about the moment the world couldn't stop replaying. No press tour, no triumphant interviews, no dramatic tweets. She stepped onto a small stage at a community center in her district. No flashing lights, no celebrity cameras, only local reporters and ordinary people who came to listen. She stood at the podium, calm as ever. No applause cue, no expectation of praise. "Just quiet, I've heard the noise," she began, her voice steady. "I've seen the clips, the headlines, the memes. But I want to make something clear. I wasn't there to win an argument. I was there to remind us dignity has no substitute." The room was still. Phones lowered. People leaned in. "I didn't speak to go viral," she continued. "I didn't speak to embarrass anyone. I spoke because we've forgotten something in our politics, that truth doesn't need to shout to be heard. That service isn't about spotlight, it's about responsibility." She didn't mention Robert De Niro by name. She didn't have to. Her words rose above the moment, turning it into meaning. "I respect passion," she said. "But passion without humility becomes noise, and noise without purpose becomes distraction." Narration takes shape in the silence around her. This wasn't a clapback. It wasn't a battle between Hollywood and Congress. It was a reminder that integrity doesn't need an audience to matter. That you can be calm and still be powerful. That you can be respectful and still be unshakable. Crockett softened her tone. "We live in a time where outrage gets more attention than honesty, where volume is mistaken for value. But power isn't how loud you speak. Power is how deeply your words stand when the echo is gone." She paused, scanning the room. No one moved. "I don't care if you're an actor or a politician," she said. "Your platform doesn't give you dignity. Your choices do." There was no thunderous applause, just a quiet understanding. Narration ties it together. This was more than a political moment. It became a mirror held up to a culture that rewards insult over insight, claps over conscience. Robert De Niro's name was no longer the headline. It was dignity itself that stood in the spotlight. Crockett stepped away from the podium. Only once more sentence was spoken. When the noise fades, truth remains. The audience exhaled, not in excitement but in relief, like someone had spoken what they'd been waiting to hear. Outside, reporters rushed to send quotes to their editors. Commentators clipped the speech for their evening segments. But the message wasn't crafted for them. It wasn't made for applause. It was made for anyone who'd ever been talked over, dismissed, or belittled, and chose to answer not with anger, but with grace. In living rooms across America, families watched her words and found something rare in politics. Stillness, not weakness. Stillness like a flag in windless air, firm, unmoving, unapologetic. And as the noise faded, one final message remained. In a world addicted to outrage, one moment reminded everyone that strength doesn't need to shout. What began as mockery ended as revelation. A Hollywood legend silenced not by volume, but by truth. Robert De Niro's smirk faded into memory, while Jasmine Crockett's composure echoed far beyond that studio. She didn't raise her voice. She raised the standard millions replayed that moment, not because of the clash, but because of the calm. In every scroll, every replay, people saw what dignity looks like when tested. It wasn't a headline. It was a heartbeat. The kind that makes you stop, think, and ask, when did politics forget respect? Crockett's words weren't crafted for cameras. They were crafted for conscience. Respect isn't earned by fame. It's earned by truth. That line didn't just end a debate. It reignited belief that decency still has power. And as she walked away, silent and steady, she carried the message millions needed to hear. That grace under fire isn't weakness. It's leadership. So if you believe in that kind of strength, the kind that chooses purpose over performance, then don't just watch this moment. Be part of it. Share this story. Stand for dignity. Subscribe for truth that doesn't shout. It stands tall. Because in a world loud with ego, calm conviction is still the most powerful microphone.